Good evening, everybody. The radical left in this country is soon to have full power and control of the United States government. With control of the House and the Senate now assured for the Democrats, Congress moved in the dead of night to certify the Electoral College victory of Joe Biden, which of course makes him the president-elect. In the process, Congress dismissed Republican objections to the electors of both Arizona and Pennsylvania. And in doing that, lawmakers also rejected the hundreds of allegations of fraud without investigation in the November election, and as well the concerns of tens of millions of Americans about the integrity of our electoral system and the counting of their votes. In a statement, President Trump responded this morning saying, quote, "Even though I totally disagree with the outcome of the election and the facts bear me out, nevertheless, there will be an orderly transition on January 20th. With the assurance that power will soon be in their grip, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer today called for the removal of President Trump, 13 days before the end of his term in office. Hardly conciliatory and hardly a transition that could be considered gracious and appropriate. These are the two leaders who said they wanted to heal the nation, but they have obviously changed their mind. They do want to remove the president, and they don't care by what means, as they've demonstrated for the past 4 years. But now, either invoking the 25th Amendment or by impeachment, which they've tried before, it doesn't matter to them, so long as the insult can continue against the President of the United States. As for his part, the President-elect today, who has called repeatedly for healing, for unity, would not comment on the latest calls to remove President Trump. The President-elect did, however, deliver what can be described only as a divisive 23-minute-long speech in Delaware, in which he slammed President Trump, shamed the behavior of all of his supporters today when the focus should have been those who became a mob, those who swarmed and entered the U.S. Capitol building.
Witness yesterday was not dissent, it was not disorder, it was not protest, it was chaos. They weren't protesters. Don't dare call them protesters. They were a riotous mob, insurrectionists, domestic terrorists. It's that basic, it's that simple.
Now, we came here today to debate, to follow regular order, to offer an objection, to follow a process that is expressly contemplated in our Constitution. And for doing that, we got called a bunch of seditious traitors. Now, not since 1985 has a Republican president been sworn in, absent some Democrat effort, to object to the electors. But when we do it, it is the new violation of all norms. And when those things are said, people get angry. Madam Speaker, it was wrong when people vandalized and defaced your home. It was wrong when thugs went to Senator Hawley's home. Now, we should seek to build America up, not tear her down and destroy her. And I am sure glad that at least for one day, I didn't hear my Democrat colleagues calling to defund the police.
Congressman Gates, putting it, in my judgment, absolutely correctly. The congressman's assertion that left-wing activists were at yesterday's protest further brought to light by none other than AT&T's CNN. That network There are reasons and other grounds for suspicion that left-wing agitators were in the mob and may have played some role. There is no proof, but there are possibilities. A video circulating
of the president's bad behavior have said those were not Trumpites, they were Antifa invading the Capitol, disguised as Trumpites. Right. So,
said one of the greatest enablers and supporters of Antifa, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. Extraordinary. Big tech barons at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube yesterday censoring the President of the United States. They removed his message calling on the protesters at the Capitol building to go home and to go in peace. Today, Facebook announced it has suspended the president indefinitely. Facebook has done that. And Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who donated $400 million to the cause of the president-elect in last year's campaign, said this, quote, President Donald Trump intends to use his remaining time in office to undermine the peaceful and lawful transition of power. We believe the risk of allowing the president to continue to use our service during this period are simply too great. Therefore, we are extending the block we have placed on his Facebook and Instagram accounts indefinitely and for at least the next 2 weeks until the peaceful transition of power is complete. Zuckerberg's pious and partisan statement coming after the president had already committed this morning to a peaceful transition with his public statement. Let's turn for a moment to look at least the joy on Wall Street, where all three indexes closed despite everything going on in our body politic at record highs. The Dow up 212 points, the S&P up 56, the Nasdaq gained 327. Volume on the big board picking up to 5.1 billion shares, new record highs, and look at the Dow Jones Industrials now above 31,000. Listen to my reports 3 times a day on the Salem Radio Network, if you will. And up next, 7th of January, 2021. Joining us now is Ken Cuccinelli, Acting Deputy Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. Ken, thanks for being with us. I think sure. One of the last times you and I talked was about sending in federal forces to secure the courthouse there. And here we are in 2021, and the situation remains the same. Your thoughts, first of all, about why violence continues, and much of it against federal buildings in various places in democratically managed and governed cities.
Well, for one, Lou, as you have pointed out, and while I was busy condemning that violence yesterday, it's shocking but not surprising. And we sent from the Department of Homeland Security several hundred officers in to support the Capitol Police when they lost control of the Capitol. Actually, we began sending them before that happened. But nonetheless, we've been consistent, right or left. Violence is not protest. It's crime, and it's not acceptable, and we stand against it 100% every time. And we do it. We did it in Portland, and we do it in Washington, D.C. And part of the reason we see it continue to go on, Lou, to your question, is because so many in the media, not you, but so many in the media and in politics have tolerated it up to now. Maybe one of the outgrowths of yesterday is that we all finally agree that violence has no place in political discourse.
One would think that would not even have to be said in the United States in 2021. It's outrageous. And what we don't know is why we have reached this stage. I'm sure that there are social scientists working on this, but suddenly there is a reflex for officers in law enforcement to reach for guns in the nation's capital. I have to tell you, I was stunned to see yesterday the Capitol Police draw weapons at unarmed protesters, even those inside. I mean, that is, to me, I have to tell you, that's outrageous. And for this young woman to be shot, and I have to believe it was entirely by accident. But that weapon was out of the holster, and it was pointed not only toward her,
deadly force, and the way you avoid that, to go back to the Portland example, there are many people who have fought our use of things like tear gas, less than lethal methods. Now, those are what should have been used at the door, and in fact, they were. Tear gas was deployed yesterday, as I understand it, but that was not done effectively or in sufficient numbers to deter a crowd from becoming a mob. And that was a failing of the leadership there. Those consequences have been rolling in. There have been 2 firings at the Capitol Police today. I want to commend the officers there. We were happy and honored to go support them, but it should have not come to that. This should have ended at the doors of the Capitol. They should have never been breached. And but the ability to use those other tactics is absolutely critical. And so a lot of the people who are complaining about the outcomes yesterday, including, just as you did appropriately, the killing there inside the Capitol, had other tactics been readily available, had enough officers been there to deploy them, you don't get to that point. It's part of how you avoid the use of deadly force, is using lower levels in sufficient numbers to never get there.
And my criticism of the Capitol Hill police officer and their commanders who had them draw weapons at that point, I do not want anyone to in any way infer from what I've said or think that I am implying a criticism broadly of the Capitol Hill police or law enforcement. But drawing a weapon, and I'm saying this straight up to anyone who wants to make something of it, to draw a weapon when they're absolutely unnecessary, and to have in the line of fire innocent civilians, even though they're part of a mob, for crying out loud, and your own fellow officers, is madness. And it should never have been allowed by the commander of the Capitol Hill Police. And I have to commend the Capitol Police because they have taken immediate action. Think of the last time we've heard, Ken, of a police department immediately putting on leave the officer involved in a shooting and firing people who were responsible in the command structure. I mean, I give them great credit. Do you as well?
I do, but to be clear, this was the Speaker of the House, and I have condemned her in the past for some of her comments against police officers in the last 6 months, but she's the one who fired these 2, and I agree with her here. This is an appropriate step to take.
Absolutely.
It's what you do with the leadership that fails like this, because you put too much pressure on those officers when you fail at the front line, and then they make decisions. They make more bad decisions in bad circumstances, and the leadership is largely responsible for putting them in those circumstances.
Right. Yeah, and I make it very clear. I am commending the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. This just doesn't happen, and it is hopefully a beginning of great change in this country in the way in which our law enforcement agencies respond and expect to be held accountable for their decisions, particularly in command as well.
They have great responsibility and great authority at the same time, so we rely on them a great deal.
And we are grateful to every single one of them. Yes. I want to turn to find out where the intelligence is, what the intelligence is saying to you and other authorities and high officials about who was involved, how that mob was created from what was to that point a peaceful and orderly protest. I mean, there are even moments you can see in this the Statuary Hall where they're walking between the rope lines. They're not even moving out of the rope lines.
Right.
And then suddenly that has become a violent mob.
Well, as so often happens, Lou, what you have was overwhelmingly peaceful for most of the day. In fact, many of them had been, for instance, in the Ronald Reagan building. You haven't heard anything about that because there were no problems there. But the Capitol was the epicenter yesterday, and we all knew that. We protected, as we do at DHS, all the other federal buildings, but we understood where the crowd was going. It was not like 25,000 people turned violent. It was, as it often is, a very small minority within that crowd that decided that the opportunity opportunity presented itself and that they were going to become violent opportunists and commit crimes and be violent, and it had all sorts of terrible consequences.
We've got just 30 seconds. Am I correct to assume that there is a vigorous investigation of all of the actors in that mob in the building? Ken Cuccinelli,
yes,
thanks as always. Good to talk with you, and we appreciate everything you do and have done. Ken Cuccinelli. D.C.'s radical Dem mayor already making demands. She Wantry will not be pleased with what may be on its way to America. With the first 100 days of a Biden administration, Washington, D.C.'s radical Dem mayor Muriel Bowser wants D.C. statehood. Bowser also demanding command of the D.C. National Guard be transferred to the D.C. mayor, not remain with the President of the United States. Joining us now, Congressman Andy Biggs, chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, also a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Andy, good to see you, and Happy New Year. And what a way to start it off with tragedy and with conflict that seems to be rising, not in any way dissipating, and largely because of the tone taken by the radical Dems here. Give us your sense of what we're dealing with when both parties have elements that are trying to remove President Trump within 2 weeks of his departure on January 20th.
Well, Lou, it portends to see what would happen when Joe Biden gets sworn in. What they're going to do is they want to get rid of Trump. They want to cancel Trump. They want to erase his memory and legacy to the American people. Mm-hmm. And I want you to think about this. So what, at the same time that they're
I understand, but go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
At the same time, they want to erase President Trump, both within the some people in the Republican Party, who, by the way, needed him to get elected just a few months ago. At the same time they want to do that, the Democrats are saying, let's be unified. Let's be unified.
Yeah, Congressman, what I really want to hear from you is, what are the Republicans going to do to defend this president? What are the Republicans going to do to understand that this isn't cricket, this is political warfare, and the radical Dems mean, if it requires it, to carry out their continued scorched earth policies?
Well, we have to continue to fight. Those of us who are willing to fight continue to fight and see this thing through. Nancy Pelosi's talking about using the 25th Amendment. That's not going to happen, I don't believe. Then they want to come in and do
we would hope
resolution to impeach President Trump. And we've got to step up and stop that. And yeah, they're going to do it again. They want to do that again.
Well,
and
I'm sure that the Republicans have a plan in place to deal with them. I tell you, America is so sick of looking at the Republican Party and seeing a bunch of milquetoast pacifists who get rolled every time by radical Dems. It's just unbelievable. And I know that adds to the frustration all across this country. Poll after poll suggests it. Congressman Biggs, you get the last word here.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. Why do you think that we only had a few people from either the House or Senate vote to sustain our objections to sitting the electors? There were so many excuses, you cannot believe it. But the reality is, we have got to get people.
Well, they worked, didn't they? Yeah, but they worked, Congressman. Yeah. They worked. Yeah. You guys keep getting rolled. And I want to sit down, and the next time when we talk, and I want you to just share with us all that the Republican Party is doing that's effective and powerful and advances the interests of their constituents back home and the interests of the nation. It would just be a delight. You're one of the few who work hard in that direction. We appreciate it. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks so much. Congressman, thank you, sir. Congressman Andy Biggs. Lou Dobbs tonight. John Fawcett down in D.C. yesterday to see what people are saying. And he asked about why who they were blaming for that Democratic sweep. Returning to those thousands who showed up to support the president yesterday, later in the broadcast. We'd like to hear your thoughts on all of this. Share your comments. Follow me on Twitter. Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook and follow me on Instagram and Parler at Lou Dobbs Tonight. The president-elect has chosen former Obama Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland to be Attorney General. Former Attorney General William Barr called Garland a great choice. Garland, a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, has ruled in favor of gun control and more environmental regulations. Also breaking this evening, after 4 years of failure, the radical Dems are trying one last time to overthrow the Trump presidency. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer calling for the president's cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president. They say they're standing by, if that fails, to try impeachment for a second time. Derangement, even in these waning days of the Trump administration, raging strongly across the Democratic landscape of Capitol Hill. Our next guest defended President Trump from the radical left's impeachment farce last year. Joining us now is former independent counsel Kenneth Starr, Fox News contributor. Ken, great to have you with us. I want to start, first of all, by, and I wish we had even more time, but the Supreme Court had two opportunities to stop all of the violence, to stop and I think create an opportunity for heal. Had it taken on the unconstitutional acts of a number of state governments in defiance of their legislatures. And they, Chief Justice John Roberts, declined twice. Your thoughts?
Well, the Supreme Court is very parsimonious as a general matter. Article 3 limits cases that come before them to what's called cases and controversies with a party having standing. That is the right to. Now, I was very sympathetic with the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, and that effort. But the Supreme Court was unanimous with the 3 Trump appointees likewise agreeing that the Texas Attorney General and the 17 other Attorney Generals did not have standing. It's tough. It's tough to get into court. So, yes, we might have a different view of that.
It is tough.
When the court,
it is tough.
But when the court... Yeah, but when
it is tough. I understand that, Ken. But we don't. Yeah. But if the court is, I don't care whether the court's unanimous. It's 5-4. I don't care. I don't care. Responsibility.
True.
And on its face, I think you say prima facie, some Latin nonsense about what we could see with our own lying eyes that had happened in Pennsylvania. That was illegal.
Yes.
What was done. It was unconstitutional.
Yes, it was.
And they should have been the court of resort for that contest against what is plainly and obviously unconstitutional conduct. And if they can come up with an excuse not to perform, why do we need a Supreme Court? The hell with it. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, it is.
Really, take a deep breath. I totally agree with you, by the way, with respect to the Pennsylvania.
Breathing, by the way, doesn't change my mind.
No, but the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the Pennsylvania governor were totally wrong. I called it a constitutional travesty on this network, and it continues to be. So I think the Supreme Court should have taken that one. It would not have changed the election.
Thank you.
That's, of course, the issue.
I'm thinking that I was starting to get rather exercised and have to breathe deeper because I thought you were changing your mind here. Because I just find it outrageous that both parties, all Americans sitting here, look what we're going through because they didn't take on that case. It's outrageous. And 60 courts across the land.
But Lou, that was only one state, and it would not have changed. That's the fundamental problem, that the litigation thing did not add up. And I want to make a constitutional point.
It also happened in Georgia.
It was up to the state legislatures to step in, not just the courts, the state legislatures to step in, and none would do it. Now, you can say, well, why is that, and so forth. But let's face it, the process that unfolded here that has upset so many people, understandably so, is the product of state legislatures not stepping up to the plate and saying, you don't fool with our laws this way, right? Now, the Supreme Court did do that in Bush v. Gore with one state, but this was 6 states. The facts were all over the place. So
is there a quota here that we don't know about?
I'm sorry?
I understand. I say, is there a quota here on what the Supreme Court can do if there's more than one state, 2, 3, whatever the number is?
No.
A serious question here.
Out-argue you, Lou. Never. Go right
No,
ahead.
I'm not. I'm certainly not going to try to out-argue you. I'm just going to try my level best to understand our legal system. It failed us, in my judgment, and I think that I'm hearing you say, at least in part, you agree with that.
Yes, I do agree with that.
If we can't find a way to deal with the efforts, a 4-year-long effort to overthrow a president that was persistent, it was animated, it was coordinated and concerted throughout. It began before the president was even elected. And we have watched our courts do nothing. We have, and by the way, I'm talking about all of the institutions of the federal government, and the left got away with us. And now they didn't have a role in stopping what was absolutely, in at least 3 instances, an outright disgrace and a violation of the Constitution. Let's get away from fraud, but unconstitutional conduct. And should the state legislators have acted? Absolutely, but they didn't. And that's the court of last resort. What have we learned going forward that can be applied and changed to save the republic?
I'm going to say this. I think we've got to be much better prepared to go into court. In my observation, some of our efforts fell short because we just didn't have the facts to show what, and the prosecutors frequently say, as you know, you've heard this, Lou, there's a difference between what I know and what I can prove. And you've got to be ready and raring to go.
Well, we all know that
right?
now.
So okay, so be prepared. The Boy Scouts were onto something with respect to that. The other thing is you've got to take these legal rules, which you might not like, into account, but they are the rules of the road, that the courts are going to be reluctant to step in, and that's true regardless of who's on the Supreme Court, and it goes back from the very, very beginning of the Republic. Courts do not want to run the country. They want those who are elected to run the country, and that's exactly what the Supreme Court said in Bush versus Gore. You elected the state legislature, and now the Florida Supreme Court is changing things. You cannot do that. And I agree with you on Pennsylvania. That was clear cut, it seems to me, agreeing, again, totally with you on this, that the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania and the governor of Pennsylvania had exceeded their powers. And Justice Alito basically said so, one of the Supreme Court justices.
Yeah. But he said so, but they didn't do much. Well, we appreciate it, and you're right. You've out-argued me, as you suggest. Now I'm upset, not only with the Supreme Court, but all the other courts, both political parties, and, of course, all of state government in all of the areas in which there were a high number of questions about their integrity. Kenneth Starr, I'm telling you, you elevate us every time. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.
When I talk to you, I always have to be in the white towel to throw in. Thanks, Lou.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Up next, Red Storm rising.
And all at historic closes. The financial markets remain stable 24 hours after what happened in D.C. tomorrow. The jobs report for the month of December. We will see you then.
All right, they are picking up the pieces in Washington, but setting new records on Wall Street. At the close, we have the Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ all at record highs. This is a day after that violent mob, which was encouraged by the sitting president, breached the U.S. Capitol. The Dow today above 31,000. Investors betting on more stimulus, it seems, from a Congress soon to be controlled by the Democrats, and that seems to be fueling hopes for an economic recovery, certainly fueling the stock market over the last couple of days, no matter what is happening in Washington. I'm Connell McShane back in New York today. Welcome to After the Bell, and we want to get straight to the news that's happening at this hour. Our Fox Business team coverage, Edward Lawrence, is on Capitol Hill. Blake Berman's at the White House, but we begin today with Lauren Simonetti and this market rally that continues. Lauren.
Hey, Connell, investors, they're looking past that political discord. All three averages record territory. It is the first record close of the year for the NASDAQ. It's the first one for the S&P 500. It was fueled by technology and financials. And guess what? This rally, it was broad. The Russell 2000 of small caps, all-time high, you guessed it. Oil pierced $51 a barrel. It closed just below that, but still, these are the best levels since February. Bitcoin went to 40,000. Cryptocurrencies are commanding a market cap of more than $1 trillion. So Tesla shares, another milestone here, above $800 for the first time ever. They're actually up 10 days in a row. And yes, CEO Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. The reheating of the tech space was seen in the leadership on the Dow Jones Industrial Average today. Look here, Apple up 3.5%, Microsoft up almost 3%. And Dow Components, Goldman Sachs, Johnson & Johnson and Caterpillar, they hit fresh record highs. This is all about what's being called reflation. A Democratic sweep means more spending, it means more borrowing, and with that, higher inflation and a less supportive Federal Reserve eventually. That is a positive for cyclicals, but we do get a reality check, and it comes tomorrow morning, 1 hour before the opening bell. That's the December jobs report. It's going to highlight the true state of the economy as we continue to battle the coronavirus, Connell.
That'll be a big one, but these are amazing numbers. Lauren, thank you. Following a day of extreme unrest on Capitol Hill, meantime, and also a power flip in the Senate, President Trump finally is promising an orderly transition of power. Now, we've not been hearing directly from the president today since his usual means of communication have been cut off. Blake Berman's live at the White House for us with the latest from there. Blake.
Hi there, Connell. And that statement came from one of the president's top aides in the 3 a.m. hour earlier today, as the president said that there will be an orderly transition of power 13 days from now on January 20th. However, Connell, that is clearly too little too late, even for some of those closest to the president, citing what happened here yesterday in Washington, D.C., up on Capitol Hill. The Treasury, the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, Elaine Chao, saying today that she is resigning and said the following in a statement saying, quote, "As I'm sure is the case with many of you, it has deeply troubled me in a way that I simply cannot set aside." Chao, of course, is also the wife of the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. The former Attorney General Bill Barr, we heard from him as well today. He is just weeks removed from his position. He said in a statement, quote, "Orchestrating a mob to pressure Congress is inexcusable. The president's conduct yesterday was a betrayal of his office and supporters." We have not heard directly from President Trump today, Connell. There was that 3 a.m. in the morning statement from his aide, Dan Scavino. There was also a Medal of Honor ceremony here at the White House that was not on camera. Connell?
Well, it doesn't have those social media options, as I alluded to in coming to you. I think we're still waiting to hear from Twitter and Jack Dorsey in terms of what might happen there. But we certainly heard from Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook today.
There was that Twitter ban on the president yesterday, and he hasn't had anything posted on Twitter since. But you're right. We heard from Mark Zuckerberg today, who said that the president will not be able to use his accounts on Facebook and on Instagram, at least for the next 2 weeks, and then indefinitely after that. This was the explanation from Zuckerberg in a post on Facebook saying, quote, "We believe the risks of allowing the president to continue to use our service during this period are simply too great." Connell?
All right, Blake. Blake Berman live on the White House North Lawn. Let's bring Steve Moore in, the FreedomWorks economist, and Robert Wolf, the former economic advisor to former President Obama. So the two good economic minds here, friends of our show as well. It's nice to have you guys on together, left and right politically.
Thanks,
Maybe
Steve.
We can agree on a thing or two. I don't know. Robert, you go first, then Steve will follow on the same thought. We're a couple of days here. Obviously, we all saw what happened yesterday in Washington. The stock market has continued to set these new highs. What is the message? What are you taking away from that? Again, Robert first, then Steve. Go ahead.
Well, first, Connell, I would agree with Blake. Too little, too late. But it's an understatement. This transition from the president's been a disaster. We have a pandemic and we have a slow recovery. This transition should be happening every day, like every normal transition when there is a passage of power. And this should have been handled. And this failed experiment for 4 years can't get out of here soon enough. January 20th can't come soon enough. Listen, Steve said 2 days ago, that the Democrats were going to lose Georgia, and if we won, the stock market would be down 1,000 points. So, I mean, he's obviously been wrong. I mean, it's clear that this country has decided that they want Democrats in power. That's who's in power. The president came in. Think about it. President Trump had a Democratic Senate, a Republican Senate, a Republican House, and he was the president. All three's been lost in his one term. He's one of the few presidents that has lost as an incumbent. And so there's change in the air. And I think President Biden is going to literally bring in a great cabinet. I think he's going to work with moderate Republicans. And I think that the market is liking the idea that we'll have an infrastructure bill passed as opposed to 4 years of talking like one.
Much more spending certainly is on the horizon, Steve, and I think we've all had this conversation before. You could get a short-term boost in the stock market from that. I know you don't like the idea, though, of more stimulus. So what's the case here? Because, you know, to Robert's point, we have seen the rally after the Democrats took control for whatever reason.
A couple things. I mean, Robert, my friend, this has been one of the most spectacular recoveries in the history of the United States, probably the best ever. I mean, we had 33% growth in the third quarter. We're on pace, according to the Federal Reserve, for 9% growth in the fourth quarter in the midst of a pandemic. We have a president who has given us in record time a vaccine that is going to save potentially tens of millions of lives. I mean, that's a pretty good record. Now, I'm not going to defend, Connell, the president's behavior yesterday. I was repulsed by what happened. But the fact is the policies work, Robert, and I have a problem with reversing the tax cuts and the deregulations and the pro-energy policies. I agree with you, Connell, that look, the markets love these spending bills. They are addicted to debt spending. And all I'll say is I think, Robert, you and I are old enough to remember in 1987 when the stock market crashed and everyone said, oh, my gosh, this is because we have too high deficits in debt. And I do believe that if we continue to run these large deficits in debt, we're going to face a doomsday. I don't know if it's coming in a month or 6 months or a year, but there is going to be a price to pay for all of this deficit spending.
What about that point, Robert, that at some point, as Steve is saying, we have to not only kind of pay the piper, so to speak, on this, but also, you know, I was thinking about this after everything that happened yesterday in Washington. Sometimes the business community and the investors in the markets can be a little late to the party in realizing how important, a geopolitical event is, or in this case, a domestic event is, and they shrug it off at their own peril. And then you get the reaction a little bit later on that, you know, we do have to deal with a government that doesn't seem to be functioning and doesn't seem to have the confidence of the people, broadly speaking. So what about the outlook longer term, even if we are getting this boost right now in the stock market?
I mean, Connell, those are great points. I think it's a bit of comic relief because Steve was a fiscal conservative who has now supported the largest deficit and the most debt in the history of our economy. So the idea that all of a sudden we have fiscal hawks and we're talking about revenue neutral and pay-as-you-go budgets, I mean, that's ridiculous. This president, this administration blew it up. Steve was talking that this trickle-down economics would actually bring 5-6% GDP. It did not bring 5-6% GDP. It brought 2.5%. And by the way, Steve, you know that the 33% at last quarter, you know that for the year GDP is down. We know it's about -4 or 5%. So we should be clear where we are. We know we're at 10 million less jobs than where we are when we started the year. So the idea that this is the greatest economy, that's just totally inaccurate. You want to believe that the last year didn't occur. I'm sorry, it occurred for those people who are unemployed, for the 1 in 5 businesses that have closed.
Go ahead, Steve.
So, look, remember, Robert, we had a little something called the pandemic, once in a century event. And obviously, that flattened the economy in the first half of the year like nothing we've seen in 50 years. I don't know if you're blaming the pandemic on Trump. My point is that the recovery that we've seen over the last 6 months, Connell, has been nothing short of spectacular. And by the way, way, way faster, much faster than anybody at the Congressional Budget Office, the Federal Reserve Board, anybody on Wall Street. They all thought we would have 10 to 12% unemployment today. We're going to get a new number tomorrow, but we're down to 6.7% right now, which is unbelievable. They thought that
well, I guess the interesting thing is, Steve, to some degree, is that the bet is now from the market, and that's what I'm trying to get at, is whether this could be wrong, is that can continue under Democratic control, that the economy, because we'll get, again, the infrastructure spending Robert alluded to, or whatever it is, we can have a stronger recovery, some seem to be arguing. But what would be the counter to that from your point of view?
So what worries me most, and if Robert, you're accusing me of being a supply sider that believes that incentives matter in economics, I stand guilty of that. I don't see, Robert, how you're going to grow this economy by raising tax rates on investors, raising taxes on small businesses, American corporations. I just don't see how that's a positive for the U.S. economy. Our tax cut had very positive effects in terms of higher wages, record employment, and record low, poverty rates in the United States for the poorest Americans.
Robert,
can I respond?
Of course.
Yeah, Steve, but unfortunately, you didn't pay for your tax cuts. So now we're in a situation where we don't have the money for another tax cut, and we have to stimulate the economy for the 1 in 5 small businesses that are closing, or for the service sector that's now unemployed. And we have to do certain things like for the pandemic, and we don't have the money. So literally, we have to get revenues. Remember when you guys said to Obama, revenue neutral? Well, you got to pay for it somehow. Where do you want to come from?
Robert, let me just
say one
thing.
Last point here, Steve. We have to wrap it in a second. So, yeah, make this the last one, all right?
Well, this is important. I mean, this is a good debate. It is true that 1 in 5 businesses are closing. Where are those businesses closing? Let's see. Oh, California, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut, Rhode Island, the red states. I mean, the blue states. If you go to Florida right now, Robert, you'll find that the business is open. You'll find that business is open in Iowa and Nebraska and Tennessee and Texas. I think the real story here is the mismanagement of the economy by these blue state governors. And what worries me, Connell, is that President-elect Biden is going to use those same failed policies in those states like New York and California and impose it on the rest of it. Robert, it's not going to work, my friend.
Well,
all right, guys, I'm going to wrap it now. Well, yeah, that's right. Well, you know what? Maybe we'll see. We'll see how it goes. That might actually happen. We thought, not to be overly dramatic, but after everything yesterday, let's get two smart guys on different sides and see maybe we can talk it through a little bit. And I think we did, right? Robert and Steve, it's always great to see both of you. So thanks for coming on. Now, say a Happy New Year as well. Back to reality, so to speak, with lawmakers